Hey, my name is Kagiso Mabutho and I am a Blender 3D artist. If you'd like to take a closer look at my renders, including the project that I'll be showing you here today, please check out my ArtStation. That's @𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 on ArtStation, YouTube and Facebook. So, I haven't shared any personal projects in a while because I've been occupied with school and work. So, Facebook. I saw this really cool image of a snake. I believe it's a green tree python. I'm not a snake expert, but yeah. And I thought to myself, how hard could making a snake be, right? It's just a cylinder with a mouth. And it was not that easy. Anyway, this was not meant to be a step-by-step tutorial, but rather an overview of my process in making this python. So, to get started, the first thing that I always like to do is to load up some great references. I found some really good ones on Pinterest. A huge appreciation to all the artists out there that share their work. So when blocking out our model, we start off by using primitives. In this case, I used the cube to create the general shape of the python before going into sculpting. So when sculpting, the idea behind it is, if you've ever worked with clay before, it's the same concept. You push and pull vertices and points to create a more detailed model. But this also creates more subdivisions and adds more geometry to your model. When sculpting the details for the head of the python, one of the brushes I used was one by Adam. I believe the link will be in the description. I didn't really want to do the whole body because I have some hardware issues, hence the reason why I switched to Ubuntu. And I have to tell you, the experience is really great again. So, moving on, what you want to do next is to retopologize your model. The idea behind retopology is you create a less dense model from your sculpt. The reason for this is because dense models tend to be more difficult to rig, texture and even animate because it is PC intensive. If you are starting to get some deja vu, the reason is after I retopologized, I ripped out the head to create my second level of detail just for the mouth. As you can see here, I'm adding more details on the inside of the mouth. Again, I'm not a snake expert. I just loaded up some references and tried to wing it as best as I could. Anyway, this video is meant for the 3-4 guys out there who might be following my work, but I'd like to share some more breakdowns and process of making my art. If you're an art enthusiast or just simply want to show support for local artists, a sub to the channel would be great, and as always, constructive criticism is always allowed and welcomed. Anyway, part of the reason why this isn't a step-by-step tutorial is because if you're new to Blender, Blender has gone from this to that. So there are a lot of new features, and I wouldn't recommend you to start learning Blender with the 2.79 series, but rather start with the latest ones, Blender 2.9, and I believe Blender 3.0 is out now. So start from there, but this process is generally the same. We follow the same process. Moving on, we go to unwrapping and baking our model. So after we retopologize our model, you notice that there are some red lines appearing on my model. These are seams. This is where we're going to be ripping our model apart to flatten it out so that we can paint and texture on top of it. If you've done geography before, it's sort of like the same model with projections when making maps. We are just basically making a map so that when we paint our details on top, the details are already assigned to specific areas on our model. Personally, I think that old tools are not obsolete. For example, I'm using Blender 2.79 here, but the process would be the same if I was using Blender 2.9, which is what I'll be using later on to render for a 3D preview using eevee. Just that the tools have really got a lot of improvement, so it's just better off to start with the latest versions moving onward, but basically the process is still the same. So we bake our maps here, like the normal map that you're seeing there. After that, we start the texturing process. So basically here I grabbed up a few references again, but I didn't want to stick to the exact references. What I actually did was I tried to find a combination of different references and went for an artistic feel, if that's what you want to call it. But yeah, as you can see, I started painting looking at my reference. I try to stick to a more realistic pattern, but you know, with these things you just keep on changing and going with what you think looks best. So if you notice from the start, I did not sculpt the rest of the body. I did not add the scale projections as I did with the head. So what I did instead, due to hardware limitations, I decided I was gonna use a scale texture and just paint over the body of the snake instead, so that I can use a normal map just for that, instead of sculpting it like I did with the head, which is basically still the same thing, because at the end of the day I'm going to be using just normal maps for the details. And moving on to painting the inside of the mouth, again, it's always a good idea to have some references, and you know, just try as best as you can to stick to your references. And again, it is just a reference, so you don't necessarily have to make exactly the same thing. Yeah, at this point I realized my model didn't have any teeth, so I decided to subdivide a cube, unwrap it, and make a basic fang. And then I duplicated one of the fangs to create the bigger fangs and the smaller teeth. I don't know if it is that visible from my reference, but I hope it is. One of the things that I've learned over the years working with Blender is there isn't really a right or wrong way of approaching 3D modeling, just that you have some more optimized ways of doing things, right? But for the most part, you really just want to follow your creative side and just try to wing it as best as possible. As long as if you've got some really good references, you're good to go. So at this point, I switched over to Blender 2.9 to, you know, take advantage of the eevee render engine, which is something that I couldn't previously do working with Blender 2.79 because, again, due to hardware limitations. But now here you can see we get an almost final look of our snake before doing a final render in cycles, cleaning up in Photoshop, and yes, that will be the end. So if you like this video, please continue subscribing to the channel and following me. Thank you.